Hey everyone, what up? Matt Kaiser here. Now you guys saw previously I did a video where me and Beck's Gaming Chats talked about what the next Star Ocean game should look like after the success and release of Divine Force and what it should do to improve upon those games. And I also did one for Tales with my boy Slice and Pie where we discussed on what the next Tales game should be like after Tales of Arise. Now I think it's time to complete what is my trifecta of the channel, and that is cover about Scarlet Nexus and its potential future, especially in the cases of a sequel and where this game could go on moving forward, especially since director Kenji Yamabuki has now tweeted for this game for now 1000 days exactly, and he said on one of his Twitter that he hopes to one day continue and devote his life as a game developer to make a sequel, something along those lines. And who best to talk about the future for Scarlet Nexus than not only one, but two good friends of mine who are absolute fans of this game, and that is of course Tales Ryu and MegumiTheGreat. And if you watch my Tales retrospective, which is currently my most popular video on this channel, you will know them for covering Tales of the Abyss and Tales of Cestiria respectively. But before we begin, if you like what you're seeing here, then by all means, like the video, click that subscribe button if you're new, and hit that bell notification icon if you want to get updated by all future Scarlet Nexus videos and JRPG content from yours truly. I'd like to ask both Toast and Megumi some questions, of course, and we are going to go through them with our own individual thoughts. So sit back and enjoy with the first question.
For SNX to become a full franchise is absolutely there. The team that brought the game to life, Anabuki in particular, has shown that the desire is there to continue creating stories in this world and with these ideas. I mean, just look at the dude's Twitter account. That being said, in my opinion, I think the main hurdle for him and his team to overcome is Bandai Namco themselves, and if they'd be willing to fund another project for the Scarlet Nexus team. I think at this point, all we can really do is wait and see.
I think Scarlet Nexus could be a franchise, but as a smaller franchise, like Star Ocean or Exapico rather than Tales of or Final Fantasy. So a franchise with a smaller amount of games in it. It would be nice to see the IP expand to explore other possibilities, since we know that Yuito and Kasane can move between space and time with the red strings, and it's a not so guilty pleasure, but I would love to see more other designs.
Both good takes, I would say. I truly, as for my instance, I would say that Scarlet Nexus does deserve to, be a franchise of its own. I do think there's a lot of potential writing of having, more games than just one game. Obviously, as Meg stated, I don't think it would realistically be on the same level as Final Fantasy and Tales of, given the fact that there's multiple titles throughout multiple generations, and Scarlet Nexus is a brand new modern IP in a similar case to how Astral Chain is, and both have similar aesthetics. And in the case of Astral Chain, it's said that Astral Chain in and of itself is also getting a trilogy of its own, so expect more games from that game alone down the line. So I think Scarlet Nexus would also deserve a chance to have a few more games that truly expand the potential of the whole brainpunk aesthetic and the whole lore around it. So yeah, obviously Scarlet Nexus definitely does deserve a sequel, let alone be its own separate series. And I think especially when you don't have combat like this, which is just so amazing.
All for a more mature story for Scarlet Nexus. In fact, I think the game we currently have is pretty dark as is. We already have child soldiers fighting brain-eating monsters, putting themselves on the line to protect a cozy society. Some of these soldiers are even fighting against their will when we consider that scouted OSF soldiers have no right to refuse the government and its laws. If a sequel or any sort of Scarlet Nexus 2 game were to double down on these facts, and also the fact that some others are metamorphosed humans, it could lead to compelling and morbid scenarios that rival those that already exist in Scarlet Nexus.
I am all for having a sequel that is more mature. I don't think Scarlet Nexus is immature, and as much as it did hurt to see Nagi end up the way he did and Naomi to end up how she did, my favorite parts were the fact that Nagi and Naomi and Yuito had some mind-boggling horrible things happen to them. It reminded me of the other Tales games that did things that were super holy crap, or what the hell is going on? And that contrasted really nicely with all the cutesy stuff, like hanging out in the hideout and all of that. Scarlet Nexus does have like a really endearing balance of edge and fluff, and I think a story becomes more mature when those two aspects are used to leverage each other and to build it up into a greater experience instead of just, straight up shock factor and everything that's an adult shows that just makes it edgy. And using powers outside of fights would be really, really nice. We already have some powers used on the field for like some light puzzle solving, and I really enjoyed that. And I would like to see those kinds of puzzles brought back, but even like to be used in more puzzling type stuff. Dare I say, Tales of Symphonia level. Okay, maybe not. Or Tales of Rebirth. Most of the powers that are in the game are geared toward combat, with the exception of teleport and hypervelocity. So if powers could be expanded to be more than just setting things on fire or electrocuting things, that would be really, really cool.
Now, originally I was gonna say that I was on board for the idea of Scarlet Nexus 2 being a more mature sequel to Scarlet Nexus 1, in a similar fashion to, say, on Anabuki's other directed game, which is Tales of Xillia 2, which in of itself was a more mature sequel to Tales of Xillia 1, even though Xillia 1 did still have some dark and depressing moments in of itself still, but Xillia 2 just ramped it up by 100, I would say. But especially once I played, like, say, Final Fantasy 16, which was truly dark, I don't think that Scarlet Nexus 2 needs to 100% go truly dark and adult, and obviously we've yet to see how Dragon Quest 12 will handle its more dark, mature themes, obviously. And I think in the case for Scarlet Nexus 2, it really does need to still have its levity on what it made it great, like it's some lighthearted moments to ease the player, showing that it's not always dark and depressing, because it could make for a joyless experience. As for the whole outside of powers concept, that was an interesting idea, especially since, as Megumi mentioned, that some of them was used outside of combat, like a few puzzles, like the whole teleportation and hypervelocity come into mind, as well as a bit of Shiden's electrokinesis also to power up some doors. Honestly, I do think that they'll probably have a little bit more emphasis on having more puzzle-based dungeons, sort of to reminisce of the classic Tales games, much to either the joy or annoyance of whoever comes across them. But I also do think that the whole superpower theme could be explored also in a narrative sense, because when you think about it, Yuito and Kasane did have some moments with the psychonesis, especially Yuito's case, where he would go unstable with his mind unless he drank those ampoules, especially on how it affects the whole Kunai Gate thing. Honestly, I do think an extension of how powers itself can be, sort of dangerous, and they can lead to some consequences within the narrative. I think a further exploration of using powers for like the story, especially that could lead to some deep commentary with the whole duds and the whole non-dud situation which we had established in the first game, would be a good idea. But overall, I'm just going to say that Scarlet Nexus, I'm on board for its sequel to be more mature, as long as it doesn't go too mature. And as for the whole power situation, I do think it's a good idea to have some ideas on how they can use powers outside of combat, especially for like exploration sense and also for story perspective.
A second game, I think the safest play would be for it to be a sequel, but I don't think that would necessarily mean that newcomers can't start with it. Obviously, in that instance, there would be some aspects of the story and characters that new players would be unfamiliar with, but in this day and age of gaming, it'd be easy enough to have a Satori archive going over the events of the story so far or something like that. As for another argument for a direct sequel, I think the established world built so far has plenty of room for exploration, both for future games of the world and also to explore past events that may not have been touched upon in the original game and its DLC. However, that is to say that if SNX were to get a sequel, I wouldn't want all of the playable characters in the first Scarlet Nexus to return. I could see a few characters making appearances, such as our leads Yuito and Kasane, and maybe some of their teammates like Kyoka, Kagero, and Tsugumi, but to rehash the entire playable cast of the first game would only make a sequel feel redundant both in writing and gameplay.
I don't know if I would want like a direct sequel to Scarlet Nexus. Well, with the way that things are going, more games are doing sequels that are kind of like following like a character that's adjacent to the cast from the first one. So like AI the Somnium Files 2 and Neo Tui, they have casts that are kind of adjacent to the original cast, and I think that would probably be cooler because I do think in the sequel Kasane would be making her way to the moon. It would be pretty interesting to see, you know, man, who's this white-haired girl coming up on this moon base and completely unaffected by the other? Like, that would be interesting. And then, you know, this new main character is like, time to investigate or something like that. And I don't know, like, I would prefer that it did use things that are already established. So like you're still using the same lore, but not really like following exactly, or after Kasane and Yuito like go their separate ways, and Yuito is just like, nah, I'm just gonna not deal with the OSF anymore. Poor guy's traumatized. Kasane, like, we know his story is done, but Kasane over here is just like, I'm going to the moon! God knows what's up there. So I think that would be cool to view it from a new protagonist's perspective.
As for my case, I do agree with both Toast and Meg's takes that I think realistically in this day and age that a sequel for Scarlet Nexus 2, like a sequel for Scarlet Nexus in general, should not be 100% direct where you have to play the first game, especially to, you know, understand what's going on with the second one. I think a sort of loosely sort of connected sequel where you get to play Scarlet Nexus 2, but you don't have to like play the first one to truly enjoy it. But if you do play the first one, you sort of enhance the experience. And Megos obviously brought examples like games like I the Summoning Files 2 and Neo the World Ends With You. And I also bring my example with Nier Automata, especially with Nier Replicant, where if you play Nier Automata without playing Nier Replicant, you can still enjoy the game on its own story, but if you played Replicant beforehand, the impact of what Automata's story would entail, especially with the later things, especially with the cases of Emil, Devil and Popola, would truly impact, especially since, you know, Replicant had its whole remaster that sort of connected truly to Automata nowadays, which is awesome. And honestly, I do think that is a good case for Scarlet Nexus 2 to have things like, again, lore summary by Satori the Archivist, which is actually a good idea and would actually give a little bit more on our boy who's been archiving our every moves and all that stuff. That would be a good idea. Or in the case, well, I don't know, something like God of War Ragnarok, where we'll have a full-on recap of the first God of War 2018 and Jedi Survivor having a recap of Jedi Fallen Order. In this case, I do think having a more loosely but still sort of connected sequel where new players get to play the game just fine, can still enjoy the story, but still obviously go through like lore details and all that stuff to sort of catch up. I think it should not be as I would say as intimidating compared to the Trail series. Like, it should be something sort of close to, say, Star Ocean in a case where it's sort of standalone, but it's set years apart. But if you play like Star Ocean 1 and 2, for example, you get a stronger connection, especially in the case of certain characters. So overall, yeah, I think having also a new playable protagonist will be a good route. I think that'll be honestly a good decision. And some characters, I think some characters from the first game can return, but not as like playable characters. Like, some of them can either make cameos or even show new roles. Like, I want to see what Shiden is doing, especially since I think he's technically now still part of the OSF. Ryuto, we can see him as, you know, like a politician perhaps, but even though you probably won't play him. And obviously the whole Kasane, Kagero and Kyoka thing where they're at the moon. Like, obviously some of them I do think can be playable, and honestly some of them deserve, and honestly some of them would have, like, you know, you get to know what they are doing of all people. And honestly, some characters don't have to return, but some of them do. And especially on some characters that only got a few minutes of screen time, like say Alice, for example. Like, especially I think we need to see more of Alice, especially with her active role. after the end of Scarlet Nexus. So overall, yeah, I do think that having a new protagonist and having sort of a loosely connected sequel will be the best route and direction for Scarlet Nexus 2 in my opinion.
Of what I said in the previous question, I would love to have a new cast of characters with appearances of the original cast sprinkled throughout. The idea of a branching story with dual protagonists is something I would love to see retained but improved upon. The two routes in Scarlet Nexus as they are unique in regards to storytelling, but far too samey in regards to the exploration, if you will. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but I believe the experience would be enhanced if each individual story was its own, well, story in its near entirety. Having the paths cross at points is perfectly fine, and a very neat idea that I think the original game pulled off well, but given the 30-hour campaign per route, it felt that these intersections were occurring almost a tad too frequently. I think my personal idea for a branching story would be for our heroes to start off in the same general location for the first few hours, split up for the entire game, before joining up again for the finale. And you might be thinking, doesn't Scarlet Nexus already do that? Yes, it sure does. However, Yuito and Kasane were both at odds with one another, and fought often whilst knowing each other somewhat personally. In a sequel, perhaps our new protagonists could simply be strangers who gradually come to learn about each other through some sort of hidden history they share. Scarlet Nexus is all about connecting with people and establishing bonds. Maybe our heroes could be connecting without even realizing it, until they meet again properly.
I would really like to see side quests get improved in a sequel because, admittedly, they were not worth doing. Like, the majority of the side quests were just kind of like, go kill these others and do it in a very specific way, of which I love the combat in this game, but I do not care enough to go and like try to do some of these things, and I say that having almost platinumed the game. Some of the side quests that we get, the rewards you get probably just progressing through the game, so like some of them you can get some like new attachments and stuff, but it's like I've already bought this, so this doesn't really matter to me anymore. I think I would also like to see a singular story, because this is an issue that I had with Tales of Exilia as well, is that I don't think there's enough difference between the two stories to warrant a dual story thing, though Scarlet Nexus did improve upon that. There are a few things that are different between Kasane and Yuito's stuff, but they both actually had different maps, which was neat, but they still kind of like aligned in kind of the same way. Not that they have to like spiral completely out of each other, but I think it would be better to kind of see it as a single story, kind of like how Tales of Exilia 2 went into a single story after Exilia 1. I also feel like if they did have multiple playable characters, it would kind of make the whole SAS thing kind of pointless, because otherwise, why bother having it? So, I don't know about that one. But I definitely would love a new protagonist. Someone that contrasts from Kasane and Yuito. I would definitely want to see Yuito again, especially after he's just like, I'm not gonna be part of the OSF anymore, I've been traumatized enough, I lost my best friend. I really just want to see Yuito and being like, yeah, I'm like volunteering as a civilian in memory of Nagi, or something like that, because I think, if I remember correctly, like, Nagi really wanted to like be a hero and help people, which is heartbreaking. That is like my number one thing. And also, like, I would like to see Hanabi, like, not end up with Yuito per se, but like making the effort, or like letting there be evidence that she like is improving herself, so that way Yuito can one day fall in love with her. That would be nice.
As for my take, I really don't think that Scarlet Nexus 2 should have another dual protagonist story, because as much as I really liked the first game's one, especially since compared to say Exilia 1's one, Scarlet Nexus's dual story was more unique in a sense, and even compared to say Star Ocean 6's one, was Scarlet Nexus had the more impactful one, even if there was a few bits of overlap. But I honestly don't think it needs to be repeated for every single game. It'll be like saying on how, especially in the case of like say Fire Emblem Fates and Three Houses have, 3 different routes. Obviously with Fates' case, each route was sold as an individual game, while for Three Houses it was mainly just 3 routes in one game. Well, 4 routes if you've or 5 if you got the DLC, yada yada yada. I don't think it needs to be repeated, especially in case on how Fire Emblem game has a one single story, because not everyone has time to beat 1 or 2 routes. Like, I do think that Scarlet Nexus 2, if it does keep the dual stories, it would sort of lose its appeal, so having a more singular route will be more easy and just have lots of things. Obviously they'll have to have some ways to make it maybe either a little bit longer or have a little bit more content, so it doesn't feel like Scarlet Nexus 2 feels less than compared to Scarlet Nexus 1's case. But honestly, they can do some ways to do it, like have more Bond episodes or other things that could truly be improved upon. Another thing I really like to hopefully see improved in Scarlet Nexus 2 is obviously, again with Meg's take, I do think that Scarlet Nexus 2 needs better side quests, because the Scarlet Nexus 1 side quests are absolutely bad. They're absolutely bad. They're so generic. They just do like generic challenges, and the items you get really are worthless because you normally get them from either a shop or you can just craft them. So honestly, these side quests just really don't do anything for the game unless it just prompts you to explore through the map all over again, or even just use Vision Simulator to get those materials and whatnot to make your gifts. I honestly do think that Scarlet Nexus 2 can have better side quests that contribute to the story, or help with characters. Like, honestly, the playable Bond episodes are better side quests than the actual side quests in that game. So honestly, just have more character side quests and whatnot, or have some mysteries throughout the lore. Honestly, and as for the case of the new protagonist, I do think that, well, Scarlet Nexus 2's case, I do think obviously it should sort of have both a few more Pi members, but as stated before, the only compromise having like a multiple playable characters, because some people really want to play as other characters like Hanabi in a sense. That does obviously makes the whole thing kind of redundant, like the whole SAS thing. There's a reason why in cases like Final Fantasy 16 you could only play as Clive with his iconic style system, or in the cases of say Sora as Kingdom Hearts, because their moveset has like tons of unique tools and mechanics that if you played as any other character, you probably just feel like you're playing it as a lesser version of Sora, especially in the case of Cage-Free Remind. Like, the only one who could stack up to Sora's moveset was Kairi, and that was only for like the final part of Remind with the whole Remind scenario. Well, in cases like Riku, Roxas, and Aqua, even though I really loved playing as Roxas, they felt limited in a sense, as they don't have that much tools. They don't have like form. Some of them don't have form changes. Some of them don't have shot locks. Some of them don't even have like air step or even like a limit break, like where Sora and Kairi have their own. So honestly, I do think it's a case where Scarlet Nexus 2 should sort of have, I guess in the case of Xillia 2, where Ludger was the one who was pretty much having all of it, like all mechanics, while others still were playable in a sense. Though that could potentially just break the game's balancing, like I do think Scarlet Nexus 2 should have, in a way, I would say, a balance where maybe the SAS could be overhauled, where in a sense where you could still have your playable characters, but you could still also use SES on like scenarios in a sense. Like, honestly, best compromise is either they keep just playing as one character, or they can switch from multiple characters, but tune the SES on things like maybe even reducing them to like say team attacks or assault visions, those kind of things, which would probably help better, I think.
Thing Scarlet Nexus was lacking was a post-game. That's not to say that every game needs a post-game. I'm personally not really a fan of post-games, I'm just saying. But SNX had a lot of cool weapons locked behind clear save data, but you couldn't do anything with them besides refight the final boss. Of course, Scarlet Nexus received a free update that gave players access to the Vision Simulator, where they could refight bosses and random other skirmishes while being timed and subjected to a sometimes harsh ranking system. But it still didn't feel like a post-game so much as it does a way for players to practice getting good. A solid post-game or even just a few hours of extra stuff to do is something I would like to see implemented. As far as SAS goes, new powers would be awesome. A certain power from Scarlet Nexus that I am incredibly intrigued by that had only one JPEG of screen time is Genesis, or Alice Ichijo's power. This is all conjecture, but seeing how it operated for that one moment in the game, and taking into account the, unfortunate anime adaptation of Scarlet Nexus, I fully believe that Genesis could serve as a power for a new protagonist. Don't get me wrong, rolling stuff around with psychokinesis has got to be one of the most satisfying things I've ever done in a game, but Genesis could operate similarly. Creating crystallized cars or blocks or pillars to swing around and drop on others, or maybe even encase them, could open up a new way of fighting against these monsters. Couple Genesis with something like pyrokinesis, like making a massive crossbow that shoots ice arrows at things. I don't know, I'm spitballing here, but theoretically it could be really cool and have unique outcomes. For party member SAS, I'm not the most creative person, but I would love to see invisibility make a return. Definitely not because I'm biased to all things Kagero and because I relied on invisibility like a crutch. In regards to other powers, I would love to see brand new ones that can be further integrated into the exploration of Scarlet Nexus. Of course, there were instances of needing electrokinesis or teleportation to get through doors and such, but I believe there's so much potential to take it further. Breakable walls, distraction tactics with duplication, dare I say a stealth mission. There's a lot that can be done, and it'd be so cool to see this team push themselves and come up with something that really heightens the original Scarlet Nexus experience.
Definitely want to see more maps in the sequel, because like I love all of the level design and all of the level art in the first Scarlet Nexus. I felt a little sad that it couldn't expand much out of that. I think having a few more places that can be explored. I mean, we'll probably go to the moon, so that's gonna like warrant some really cool looking stuff, or probably some really horrific things. Both of which I'm fully like going to accept. I also would really want like new SAS powers. I am kind of sad that we never got to have like we had Shiden, so Seto's powers were already there. But Fubuki, Naomi, Nagi, specifically. What can I say? I'm a Nagi fan. Like, I would like to see like new powers and stuff. Like, the possibilities are endless. This is such like an open-ended kind of thing. You could basically just do anything. And we also have evidence that powers can double up. So like both Yuito and Kasane have red strings. Both Shiden and Seto have electrokinesis. Who's to say like there's not an entire faction that just all wields like moon rocks or something. So that would be really cool. And then if they are to go with dual stories again, I think I would like a little bit more unique bosses between the two stories, because like I think in Scarlet Nexus you have like one or two, maybe three specific like route specific bosses, but it would be cool to just have like a variety of things. Now that also said, I think Scarlet Nexus is a little on the smaller side, so if there's more funding and there's a green light and all of that, I feel like they could do way more.
Now, whether, depending or not, we get to either play as like the new main character primarily, or even have a multiple bunch of playable characters, and whether or not their SAS is tuned or not, or balanced, who knows, we'll have to wait and see. I do think that Scarlet Nexus 2 should have like a ton more SAS powers, because some of them were cut from the base game and only used in like say the bosses, in cases of like say aerokinesis and cryokinesis were originally going to be used as playable powers, but obviously they were cut and it was used in bosses like Karen and Nagi. Well, Nagi using aerokinesis and Fubuki was only using cryokinesis in the cutscene, so I'd like to see those powers. I would also like to see some powers involving like water, like aquakinesis, or even something like a toxic kinesis that inflicts like say poison or other status ailments. That would be a cool thing. And as well as some powers that obviously were on like one-time uses, like obviously there was Genesis, which from Toast's take is actually a good idea. I think honestly having the new protagonist, maybe even having an extension of psychokinesis but also genesis, since that does seem like an interesting cool power up and extension of what we had in the base game that ours had, so that would be cool. And even having Naomi's power precognition, sort of similar vision to well, the visions in Xenoblade Chronicles 1 with the whole Monado, and how you can use it to like predict on enemy movements, but you can't like spam it. Like it will drain as much as you use them, and it will sort of like give an idea on how to do it. It's sort of similar to, I say, clairvoyance, where you get to read and perfect dodge and counterattack them, but I think precognition will help you like predict and see on what the enemy will do and how you can counter it, but obviously the more you use it, the more quickly drains, so I think that would be a good balance. Another thing I would like to see is more maps, and probably the level design a little bit more expanded upon. Like, as much as I'm okay with how the level design is, I honestly do think it would need a little bit more on the exploration and sense. Like, honestly, I think I'd like to see some cool things. Like, who knows? Maybe I'd like to see, Baki being collectible. Like, imagine having throughout the whole map of the world of Scarlet Nexus, there are these Baki collectibles that you had to find. And lore-wise, it could be related to like a legendary OSF member, or even something like, say, I don't know, Yakumo Maragi, where we get to learn a little bit more about him. Now, obviously, whether or not I say that truly retcons his character or not, since we've learned quite a bit about him, but I do think having like more reasons to explore Scarlet Nexus' world, and having more locations than what we've seen from the base game, and also including the moon. Obviously, I do think even the potential to explore the moon as part of the game as like a second world, since that sort of thing in certain Tales games, and even in the case of technically even Star Ocean itself, depending on the game I'm talking about, where you get to either explore your Earth or even the moon, which will be a cool idea. I'm really excited to possibly see what the moon will be like, honestly, because we've barely seen explorable moons, especially for JRPGs in the case. So I do think, obviously, I can't say I've known a lot other than the whole Final Fantasy XIV Endwalker thing, but I haven't played Final Fantasy XIV, so can't really make a full assumption of that. But other than that, I think that's also good things, and also have a bigger post game, and even have maybe even some dangerous giant major others explored around as like optional bosses, sort of like like extra bosses you see like as like Code Red demons or gigantos in a sense. And if you do encounter one, you have to be prepared, and they'll hit you hard unless you're at the right level and you have the right equipment, right setup, all that stuff, and you can take them down. That would honestly escalate and make the others more intimidating, like a major other, since we rarely see only a few mandatory major other bosses that are quite unique. But other than that, that's another thing. And honestly, yeah, most of the bosses are more post-game in a sense. Like, obviously, other than the Vision Simulator, and also having to refight bosses, I would like to see some unique super bosses, especially since we got one with the Shadow of Recording DLC super boss, and honestly, even more harder others. Like, that would honestly be cool. And even if it doesn't go off Fleet and Tail sense, since honestly, Tales normally has the whole cameo bosses, and in the case of Star Ocean, or I should say the Tri-Ace games, they would have their unique super boss in the form of the Ethereal Queen and Gabriel Celeste. So maybe even Scarlet Nexus could even have its own unique super boss that reappears quite a bit, sort of like its own, like, say, Final Fantasy Gilgamesh in a sense, like a guardian of sorts that's sort of between space and time, especially with the whole on how much the Red Strings has been using it, and the whole Kunai Gate thing. Like, maybe even a deity, even though obviously Scarlet Nexus doesn't really have the whole killing god situation, so that might be a little bit out of place.
For Scarlet Nexus, there really are no words that are great enough to express how much this game means to me, and it's a game that I fell in love with as soon as I started playing. Like, I played this game during my job hunt into the game industry, and the more I played, the more I wanted to just learn everything I could, because the combat is amazing in the game, the level design is beautiful, I love the characters, the music is awesome, like, everything about this game just hit me so well that I'm just like, oh man, I love this game so much. And then I ended up getting a job in the industry, so now I don't get as much time to play it. But, like, from everything that is in this game, it's just one of those things, it's one of those games where I'm just like, I want to learn everything so that way I can, like, do things like this. So it's a major source of motivation to me. And even though it's, like, a brand new IP, it still holds a lot of nostalgia from, like, the Tales series, because I know a lot of Tales veterans, I think, worked on this game. I've also made a lot of friends from this game, and I really look up to director Anabuki and the designers and the programmers and the artists that all worked on this game. And, you know, it's a joy to wake up to, like, director Anabuki's daily Scarlet Nexus screenshots. It's been going on for 1,000 days, and this poor man, but, like, he did it. This is gonna be a little weird, but on the off chance that any of the developers or anyone that hasn't touched Scarlet Nexus, thank you to those who worked really hard on this game, and if you haven't played this game, like, definitely check it out. It's really amazing. I'm still waiting for a physical release of the soundtrack and character art book or setting materials or something like that. Like, I would pay money for this. Also a Yuito figure, some more Nagi stuff. At the very end of all of this, that I just want to say is just thank you to director Anabuki for the love and passion that went into this game, and for, like, the motivation and inspiration that this game has given me, and I can't wait to see more that comes out of the Scarlet Nexus IP.
And to wrap things up, I'll give my thoughts on the whole Scarlet Nexus and how it means to me. Well, obviously, Scarlet Nexus is one of my favorite games I played in 2021, and is one of my favorite JRPGs of all time. And you know how much I love to cover it on depth compared to other two JRPGs I also love covering, and soon later 3 and 4 will also be coming in its place. And honestly, I do think the potential for Scarlet Nexus was truly awesome. Like, I remember the whole feeling when there was a new brand Bandai Namco action RPG IP, and when I heard that was made by former Tales stuff, I was like, you know what, sign me up. And when I played the demo and saw more of it, I was truly impressed with what I was looking at, and it does give me some good Tales vibes. And honestly, I think the potential for Scarlet Nexus on its future is great, and I honestly think that people really need to give this game a go, especially since it's, you know, cheap nowadays, especially on sale, and with the tons of improvements it has. Like, honestly, the feedback on Scarlet Nexus and what this game improved upon, especially from its original release, was impressive. And honestly, Kenji Anabuki should be praised. Like, honestly, that man has tons of passion and is very kind, and honestly, he's very aspiring, and I admire his work on prior Tales games, and I admire his work on Scarlet Nexus, and that same goes to the other devs who worked on this. And hopefully he can make more passion projects like this game in the near future, because honestly, I think it's well deserved. And Bandai Namco, please greenlight a sequel for them, because honestly, they deserve, their work needs to be deserved. And honestly, I think they obviously have more things planned on what they want to do moving forward, hopefully. But thank you both Toast Ryu and MegumiTheGreat for being on this channel. It was an absolute pleasure collabing with you two girls. But other than that, what do you guys think? What are your guys' takes on how Scarlet Nexus 2 should be handled like? Let me know down in the comments below, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Until then, Kaiser out.